Hey, beautiful, please consider subscribing to our channel if you've been enjoying these stories. Your support helps a lot. Aid us in reaching our goal of 1,000 subscribers.
Thunder cracked overhead as my boots hit the gravel driveway, the familiar sound oddly soothing after 18 months of chaos. My duffel was slung over one shoulder, and the scent of diesel still clung to my uniform. I'd been dreaming of this moment, stepping onto my own land, walking the path to my villa, hearing the rustle of wind in the trees that lined the pond I built with my own hands. But as I rounded the bend, something felt wrong. The air was dry, too dry. No scent of wet stone. No croaking frogs or birds fluttering near the water's edge. My pace quickened. Then I saw it. Where my pond should have shimmered beneath the afternoon sun, there was nothing but cracked earth. Dusty, splintered, and dead. The reeds were brittle, the rocks displaced. A single koi lay petrified near a dry clump of grass, its orange scales dulled by time and neglect. I dropped my bag. My heart punched my ribs. That pond wasn't just a hobby or a landscaping feature. It was the last thing my father and I ever worked on together. We'd laid the foundation the summer before his final deployment. When the news came that he wasn't coming back, I finished it alone, every stone a whisper of him. I staggered forward, kneeling at the dry edge. My fingertips scraped the cracked mud, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Then I heard a voice. "Oh, you're back early. We weren't expecting you for another few weeks." I turned to find her standing at the edge of my property line in crisp white slacks and a pale pink cardigan. Clipboard in one hand, phone in the other. Sunglasses too big for her face. The HOA president, Clarice Monroe. Her lips pursed in what might have been a smile to a mirror, but on her face, it looked like judgment dipped in honey. "What happened to my pond?" I asked. My voice was gravel. "All that. We had to drain it. It was a breeding ground for mosquitoes," she said as if she'd merely trimmed a hedge. "You drained it?" "Yes. There was standing water. That violates Policy Section 4B of the Association's Landscaping Compliance Clause. We posted a notice. I was deployed." "We assumed as much," she replied coolly. "But your property is still under jurisdiction, and unattended water features are a hazard." "Nothing personal." I stepped toward her. "You didn't think to call? Email? Wait until I got back?" "We're not responsible for monitoring your calendar," she said, shifting her sunglasses down her nose. "Besides, you didn't respond to any of the mailed notices." I bit the inside of my cheek. "Because I was overseas." "Then perhaps you should have appointed someone to manage your affairs," she said, a little too brightly. "We follow policy here. No exceptions." I didn't respond. Not because I couldn't, but because I knew what would happen if I did. My fists stayed at my sides, twitching. I walked past her and into the villa. The silence inside pressed against me. No hum of the filtration system. No bubbling waterfall. I went straight to the back patio and scanned the entire yard. The pumps were gone. The solar filtration array was missing. My benches had been moved, or taken. The plaque that used to sit by the water's edge, my father's plaque, was gone. It wasn't just vandalism. It was erasure. I called the emergency number listed on the HOA's website that night, trying to get answers. All I got was a voicemail. I left a message. Then another. Nothing. The next day, I walked into the HOA meeting wearing my service dress. Medals aligned. Boots polished. I stood tall in front of the gathered board members. Clarice sat at the head like a queen on her throne, flanked by her two loyal sidekicks, Douglas, the treasurer who always looked like he'd rather be golfing, and Melanie, the secretary with a smile as sharp as a kitchen knife. "I want to know who authorized the destruction of my property," I said. "Come." Measured. Clarice didn't look up from her papers. "As previously stated, the pond was in violation. I have a county permit for that pond. I filed it 5 years ago. Permits expire. They don't expire unless the structure changes, which it didn't. I've got the full documentation." "That doesn't matter," she replied, eyes now fixed on mine. "HOA policy is enforced independently of county regulations." "You mean above the law?" "Let's not be dramatic," she said, finally offering a smile. "You were away. We took initiative. I lost thousands of dollars in equipment. I lost fish I raised for years. You didn't just drain a pond, you destroyed something personal. My father and I built that together. He died in service. That pond was all I had left of him." There was a flicker. A pause in the room. Clarice's jaw tightened. But then she said, "This isn't a military base, Mr. Delaney. This is a residential community. And we can't make exceptions based on emotional sentiment. We have to maintain standards." That's when Douglas snorted. Maybe you should have filled it with something useful, like a hot tub. Laughter echoed through the small room. A few neighbors looked away. Most didn't. My voice didn't rise. It dropped. Cold and even. You'll regret this. Clarice straightened, her voice clipped. Is that a threat, sir? No, I said, stepping back. That's a promise. I left that meeting to silence, except for Melanie whispering something behind her hand. When I got home, I stood by the edge of the dead pond, fists in my pockets, rage and grief twisting in my gut like wire. They thought I was just another homeowner. Just another face to silence. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. The pond was gone. My name had been mocked. My father's memory erased like it was a garden weed. And as the wind rustled through the dry reeds, I realized something I hadn't felt since my boots hit that dusty foreign ground. This was war. The next morning, I stood over the cracked basin of what used to be my pond, sun beating down like judgment. I scanned the damage again, this time not with grief but with purpose. Something about the way Clarice spoke at the meeting hadn't sat right. There was confidence in her tone, a rehearsed certainty, like she'd been expecting me to come and challenge her, and already knew she'd win. I pulled out my phone and started making calls. The permit office first, then code enforcement, then the county zoning board. It took hours. I sat on my patio, listening to bureaucrats shuffle through systems and explain away delays and technicalities. Every single one told me the same thing. They couldn't find any active complaints against my pond. No violations logged, no citations, no mosquito control issues ever filed. No one from the county had ordered that pond to be drained. No official inspection had even been done. The HOA had acted alone, which meant they didn't have a reason. They had a motive. I grabbed a notepad and began writing down everything I could remember. The timeline. Dates of deployment. When I last saw the pond in good shape. When the destruction happened. I remembered Clarice saying, "We weren't expecting you back yet." That stuck with me. How did she know my return schedule? I hadn't told anyone in the neighborhood. My orders were classified until deployment ended. Unless someone had gone digging. That evening I called Vince Sanchez, a former squad mate. He now worked in infrastructure planning for the state, civil engineering projects, environmental reviews, the kind of red tape Clarice probably thought no one would ever question. "Hey, you back stateside?" he asked when he picked up. "Yeah." Got home to find a crater in my backyard where my pond used to be. Jesus. What happened? HOA drained it while I was gone. Said it was non-compliant. Wait, wasn't that pond legally permitted? It still is. County records confirm it. No health violations, no inspection orders. Nothing. He was quiet for a second. That doesn't make sense. No, I said, voice lowering. It doesn't. I think they did it for another reason. You want me to dig around? He asked. Not officially. Just, let me know if anything odd's gone through your office. Something involving my neighborhood. Developments, construction, road permits. Anything. I'll call you tomorrow. While I waited for Vince's reply, I kept my ears open. I walked the neighborhood. Asked friendly faces casual questions. Nothing overt. Most gave me confused sympathy, said they liked the pond, thought it added character to the property. One older couple down the block said their grandson used to fish from the rocks there. But when I mentioned Clarice or the board, lips tightened. People were afraid. Not of me, of retaliation. Then on the third day Vince called back. You're not going to like this, he said. Go on. About 3 months ago, your HOA applied for a temporary construction access variance. Said they were granting access to an adjacent development project through one of the lots at the rear of your neighborhood. That's my property line. Exactly. There was a mapped easement, except there's no record of your permission being granted. They submitted it like the land was already cleared. Cleared of what? Of water, he said. The aerial maps they included in the application? No pond. It was already gone in the blueprints. I didn't speak for a few seconds. They filed the application while I was in Afghanistan, I said quietly. Yep. And it looks like the developer signed a preliminary agreement with the HOA. Conditional on the route being accessible, which it wasn't because of your pond. So they made it accessible. He didn't have to confirm. I could already feel the rage boiling behind my ribs. Clarice hadn't just drained my pond out of petty rule following. She'd done it for money. For a construction deal. For access to build a bridge over the rear section of the community and into the valley behind it, cutting through land she didn't own. What? I thanked Vince, then called Reed. Reed was another old squad mate. These days he worked in environmental risk assessments, the kind of guy corporations brought in to certify that their projects wouldn't collapse under a lawsuit. He owed me 3 favors. I intended to cash them all in. I need you to take a look at some satellite footage, maybe swing by my place if you're free. For what? I think the HOA committed environmental fraud on top of property destruction. You had me at HO, he said. He arrived the next afternoon, khakis dusty, laptop bag slung over one shoulder. We walked the yard, him snapping pictures, jotting notes. He picked through the remains of the filtration system, examined soil samples, and frowned over the remnants of the koi graveyard near the drainage ditch. This wasn't just drained, he muttered. It was intentionally excavated. You see this trench line? That's not runoff, it's mechanical grading. Somebody used equipment. They tore out your basin liner too. Probably to prevent refilling. Yeah, and to void your water rights. That's why they bulldozed it. He looked up. They wanted it legally dead. Can you prove any of this? He nodded. With time. And records. I'll get you records. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at a map of my property lines and the newly approved development. The bridge was a direct link to a future retail district in the valley. Clarice and the board stood to gain prestige, funding, and probably some quiet kickbacks once that land became accessible. But none of it worked unless my pond vanished. And they thought I'd stay quiet. Come home, grieve, then let it go. But they forgot who I was. Who I knew. And what I'd learned from years spent in places where silence meant danger and every move was part of a larger game. I didn't have to threaten them. I just had to outmaneuver them. And I knew exactly who could help. The sun hadn't yet risen when I walked the perimeter of my property, boots silent on the dew-soaked grass. In the stillness, I could almost hear my father's voice telling me to keep my head clear, to stay 3 moves ahead. Rage made you reckless. Strategy made you dangerous. Clarice thought she'd buried a pond. She didn't realize she'd unearthed a war. I started collecting everything: emails, letters, meeting minutes, HOA newsletters, satellite images, timestamps. I compiled it all into a case file thick enough to slap on a desk with authority. Meanwhile, Reed quietly ran environmental reports on what was left of the pond, and Vince began pulling permits from the State Development Office, threading the needle of corruption hiding in plain sight. But I knew this couldn't just be a paper war. I needed someone who could navigate the HOA's own language, someone who could weaponize bureaucracy the way Clarice had. That's when I called Jenkins. Jenkins had been our team's intel guy. Always reading, always quiet. These days he worked in legal enforcement, specifically real estate compliance. The man could smell a forged document from a zip code away. When he arrived that Friday, he brought a black folder and a crooked smile. I heard they stepped on your land, he said. Figured I'd bring some fireworks. I handed him copies of everything. He flipped through with trained precision, stopping only once to whistle under his breath. They filed an easement transfer without your signature, he muttered. That's a felony. Can we prove it? If we get our hands on the original HOA meeting minutes and compare them to what they submitted to the county, yeah. They're not giving that up willingly. He leaned back. Then we make them think they already have. I watched as he outlined the plan on my kitchen table, marker squeaking over an old zoning map. We'd issue a records request through a proxy resident, someone who'd raised no alarms. Once we had the internal documents, Jenkins would compare them against county submissions and Reed's environmental reports. If everything lined up the way we suspected, we'd have not just a property rights violation, but documented fraud. I recruited Bill Latham, a quiet, retired schoolteacher who lived 2 doors down and had no love for Clarice after she fined him for his lawn gnomes. Bill was more than happy to play our Trojan horse. By the end of the week, Bill walked out of the HOA office holding a manila folder and looking like he'd just smuggled state secrets. Inside were the meeting minutes from the month they filed the development access request. Clarice's name was stamped all over it, along with a line that made Jenkins snap upright. Owner of Lot 47 verbally approved demolition for compliance. That's my lot, I said. And there's no record of you giving consent. Verbal or otherwise. I shook my head slowly. I was in a forward operating base halfway across the world. Then she forged the entire approval. Jenkins took the documents and began compiling the legal complaint. Meanwhile, Reed reached out to an environmental watchdog group who had teeth and a taste for HOA corruption. Within days, they were combing the remains of my property, documenting every ecological violation. Turns out the soil still had traces of aquatic life, the kind protected under state conservation law. The frogs, the koi, even the reeds. This wasn't just property destruction, Reed told me. It was ecological negligence. The story was already beginning to gain quiet traction. A local reporter showed up one afternoon, notebook in hand, asking polite questions while taking pictures of the cracked pond bed. I didn't say much. Just told her the truth and let the weight of the silence do the rest. But the strike that hit hardest came from Vince. He'd been monitoring the state infrastructure database and found that the developer, Hearthstone Holdings, had already finalized funding projections based on the bridge project, despite not yet securing final approval. That meant Clarice and the HOA had likely promised more than they legally could. So we pulled the plug. Through Vince's office, the state issued a hold order on the bridge project pending investigation into easement legitimacy and potential fraud. The funding was frozen. Contractors backed out. The developer started asking uncomfortable questions. Clarice panicked. I got a knock at my door the next day. She stood there, her perfect hair a little out of place for the first time, papers clutched in one hand, sunglasses trembling in the other. Mr. Delaney, she said, her tone much less condescending than before. I'd like to revisit the situation regarding your pond. I leaned against the doorframe. You mean the one you drained without notice while I was serving my country? Her mouth twisted, unsure whether to smile or defend herself. We may have acted prematurely. No. You acted fraudulently. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Perhaps we could come to a mutual arrangement. Compensation. Restoration. I stepped forward, eyes locked to hers. There is no arrangement. There's an investigation now. You'll be getting your letters soon. She blinked hard. What kind of letters? Legal ones. She tried to smile again, but it faltered. I closed the door in her face before she could speak another word. That night I posted a video. Just a quiet walk through the wreckage of the pond, my voice steady over the footage, explaining what happened. I didn't mention names, didn't call anyone out directly. I didn't have to. The internet filled in the blanks. Within 24 hours, the video had over 800,000 views. People were furious. Veterans, environmentalists, regular folks who'd had their own HOA horror stories. They rallied in the comments. They started a petition demanding the state investigate the HOA board. They emailed the governor. Clarice tried to hold another board meeting that week. Less than 10 people showed up. Some wore shirts that said, "Restore the pond." Others just stared at her in silence as she tried to maintain control. But it was already slipping. The documents were filed. The state had launched a formal review. The developer had withdrawn from the agreement. My lawyer confirmed that, barring a miracle, Clarice was looking at civil liability and criminal charges for document falsification and unauthorized land alteration. I stood on the edge of my ruined pond and exhaled. The land still bore the scars, but the war was shifting. No longer silent. No longer one-sided. She had built her little kingdom on arrogance, deception, and control. Now it was starting to crack. The summons arrived on a Thursday morning, thick cream-colored envelope resting on Clarice's welcome mat like a snake coiled in silk. By noon, word had spread across the neighborhood. A formal investigation into the HOA board. Charges pending. Civil litigation from multiple homeowners. And a separate legal complaint, signed by me, asserting criminal trespass and falsification of property documents. The next time I saw her, Clarice was no longer flanked by her usual entourage. She stood alone on the sidewalk, arms folded tight across her chest, lips pursed like she was trying to swallow a lemon whole. Gone were the pearls and power blouses. She wore flats and plain beige, neutral, like she hoped the world would forget her. She didn't say a word. The fallout came fast. Melanie and Douglas resigned 2 days later, slipping away like rats from a burning shed. An emergency vote was called, but nobody showed up except reporters. A new headline ran in the Sunday paper: Veterans Pond destroyed by HOA, state launches corruption probe. Below it, a photo of me standing by the cracked earth, arms crossed, eyes forward. But the real reckoning came during the town hearing. The community center was packed. Residents, reporters, legal observers. A small crowd even gathered outside, holding signs painted in red, "Justice for Lot 47. The air inside buzzed with anticipation, like lightning waiting to strike. Clarice walked in late, shoulders square, trying to fake confidence. But her eyes darted too fast. Her jaw clenched too tight. When they called my name, I rose and walked to the front with quiet purpose. I didn't wear my uniform. I wore a dark blue suit. I didn't want their sympathy. I wanted their respect. I laid the documents out on the podium. Permits, county maps, timestamps, photos, environmental assessments. Then I spoke calmly, clearly. I deployed with the understanding that my home would still be mine when I returned. That my memories, my family's history, my peace would be waiting. Instead, I came back to find the last piece of my father erased, dumped in a ditch and paved over for profit. There wasn't a sound in the room. I did not give permission for access. I did not sign over rights. I was not notified. And my father's memorial was destroyed, his name stripped from the plaque that once stood beneath the cherry tree we planted together. My throat tightened for a second, but I held firm. The people responsible for this stood behind rules they bent to suit themselves. They broke laws. They forged my consent. They gambled with my land and thought they could bury the evidence along with the water. But they forgot something critical. I paused, letting the silence stretch. They forgot who I used to command. They forgot I don't fight alone. Behind me I heard the sound of boots. 4 sets, moving in unison. My squad, Vince, Reed, Jenkins and Cole, had come dressed for the moment. Not in uniform but with presence. Professional, powerful, each carrying a binder or file in hand. They weren't just veterans. They were now engineers, consultants, investigators and lawyers. Clarice turned pale. The state board members leaned forward. Jenkins approached the front and laid a second stack of documents on the table. These are the original HOA meeting minutes, compared against the submitted records for the easement access application. They do not match. What was sent to the county includes falsified owner approval, specifically the forged consent of Mr. Delaney. Next was Reed. This is a certified environmental impact report. The pond that was destroyed housed several native species. No authorization was granted for removal or excavation. The HOA violated multiple conservation laws. Then Vince. These are communications between the HOA and Hearthstone Holdings. They show advanced negotiations and pressure to eliminate obstacles for the proposed bridge. The pond, and Mr. Delaney's land, was labeled a barrier. These messages prove motive and timing. Each piece of evidence was a nail in Clarice's coffin. By the time Cole stepped forward to speak on the civil suits filed by other residents who'd also suffered under her rule, she was staring at the floor. When the hearing closed, she didn't even try to speak. The consequences came swiftly. The HOA's bridge deal collapsed. Hearthstone Holdings withdrew, citing legal instability and internal HOA dysfunction. Clarice was removed as HOA president and indicted for falsification, destruction of private property, and abuse of position. A lien was placed on her home to cover the costs of restitution. But none of that compared to the final blow. A video leaked the next week, footage from a town hall security camera. Clarice screaming at a maintenance worker. He doesn't need a pond. He needs to learn who's in charge around here. The internet feasted on it. Memes exploded. One showed her red-faced image next to a koi fish in a general's hat. Caption, asterisk, she drained the pond, he drained her career. Asterisk. The story went national. News anchors called it a case study in HOA overreach. Veteran groups rallied behind it. Donations poured in. A landscaping firm, veteran-owned, volunteered to help me rebuild. Local students helped replant lilies. Volunteers dug trenches, set new filters, and restored the stonework exactly the way it used to be. The pond was reborn. But now it had more than water. It had justice layered beneath every rock. At the rededication, I stood beneath the cherry tree with a new plaque in hand. I placed it in the ground with my squad standing nearby. The brass glinted under the sun. In memory of Sergeant Thomas Delaney, built with honor. Destroyed by cowards. Rebuilt by brothers. The crowd clapped. My mother cried. And I finally let myself exhale. As we walked back toward the villa, Reed nudged me. You know, there's something poetic about the fact that all she wanted was a bridge. And? Well, he grinned, now the only bridge she's crossing is the one to the courthouse. Laughter followed us home. My home. Still mine. Still standing. The water glittered behind us, koi once again circling in peace. But this time they weren't alone. Justice had taken root here. And this time it was permanent.